Okay, everybody. Welcome to Co-Creating the New Earth with the Fae and the She. I'm Marguerite Rigoglioso, and I am the director of Seven Sisters Mystery School. We want to warmly welcome you, whether you're watching live or whether you're watching in replay. I have with me two beautiful, powerful guests today. Who are going to be talking to me about the wisdom, the magic traditions of their background, their heritage. Before we jump in with that, I want to say that we are in the time of pre-Thanksgiving in the US as we film this. And so we will also be looking into some of those matters, the painful and the positive and hopeful about that today. If you get value out of this video, we invite you to like it and to share it. And please feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel so that we can bring more of this wonderful content and it can reach more people. Also, letting you know that we have a Seven Sisters Mystery School winter solstice celebration that's coming up as we are filming this live, December 18th, Sunday, December 18th, online. And you can go to sevensistersmysteryschool.com and find out more information about that and register. And you will learn how to order your cacao for that. These have been wonderful, wonderful events that we've been doing. And the theme for this one coming up is Become the Christ Sophia Light, accessing everything you need from source within. So this is really going to be an opportunity for us to go deeply, expand our light bodies, our energy, and understand what it truly means to be a person of spirit walking the planet, how we can access everything we need so that we are not in those kinds of expectations and dependencies around others, and we can be in happy co-partnership with them. All right. We also have a number of other things for you to enjoy this holiday season. As this is being filmed right before Thanksgiving, we invite you to take a look at my online webinar, Putting the Sacred Back in Your Holidays, which you can also find if you go to sevensistersmysteryschool.com, right there on the page. This is a really beautiful jewel of a webinar with 4 self-paced audios. The first one is really great to listen to before Thanksgiving. To truly make this a sacred holiday for yourself, for you to be able to bring sacred energies to your gatherings, whether it be U.S. Thanksgiving or any of your other holiday gatherings, for you to be in gratitude. And I offer many, many tips for how you can make the most of this day. And then also throughout this holiday season, going off into the new year, what you can do to really amplify your positive visioning energies, go deeper into the mystery of this time of year, be a sacred space holder for others, and avoid getting sideswiped by some of the typical things that can happen at holiday time as we go into relationships with family, loved ones, and all of that brings up. So please take a look, and that is accessible to you right now. All right. So today I am joined by the absolutely wonderful Kristine Hill, who is a member of the Beaver Clan of the Tuscarora Nation. And that is part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy that I have spoken about numerous times and taught about over the years. Some of that traditional background in conjunction with some of the sacred women from that tradition. So we are so happy and honored to have her here. She is to some degree a neighbor of mine, and I could not be more delighted about that. I also have her partner, Sara Jolena Wolcott, who is of Quaker background, and she comes from a lineage of folks who came over to this continent, to Massachusetts, I believe, and had a lot to do and say around these colonizations and so forth. So both of them bring lots of wisdom. And what we want to do today is open up the floor to them. And I think what I'll do is start with Chrissy. Perhaps if you wish, you could do, if you feel comfortable, some kind of brief opening that might relate to the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address to honor your tradition and also the season that we're moving into in the U.S. Would you like to do that?
Sure. And thank you for the invitation, and happy to be here and settle into this space. And I missed the pre-show gathering, but I would like to bring in the turkeys as part of our conversation today. We've been graced with many turkeys of different sizes, and some are this year's, some are last year's, and they dance in circles and they kerfuffle and they kick up leaves and they run up the hills. And I'd just like to acknowledge the turkeys as being very present in our lives right now, and the wisdom that they share with us through all the things that we can engage with. And so the words you were talking about, we know them as the words before all else, Kanaharathetra in Tuscarora, Ganonyok in Mohawk. And we start a lot of our doings and a lot of our events. We start the week. We close the day with these words, the words before all else. That is a series of gratitudes, starting with the people and moving through plants and animals and celestial beings and elements of nature and of creation in and of itself. And so these gratitudes are known as the Thanksgiving address. And I always think about this name, Thanksgiving address, was put on by people that were not us. And so that when you hear the title, it makes you think, it could possibly make you think of just one day of gratitude. And that is not what these words are for. They're to bring us to peace. They're here to bring us together with one mind, so that we can do the work. And it's not the universalization of one mind, but one mind that we can sit with each other and bring each of our perspectives, each one of our values and our resources and our roles and responsibilities, that we can make this into a collective wisdom, and we can work together in community and enjoy the harvest, the food that was so long in coming from the cold winter that we're heading into, and the abundance and grace of sharing and having something to plan for next year. And so, the version of Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving address, is many gratitudes in many different ways. It can be from the below the ground to the ground up to the sky, and it can be horizontal to everything that we can see around us, the birds in the sky, the winds, the grass, the trees, the bugs, turkeys. And with that, welcoming all of us who are watching into this space and the lands that we're on, and appreciation of what we have together in this gathering.
Blessed be. And Sara, would you like to offer a brief welcome and thanks that reaches back to your ancient traditions and ancestors as well?
When I listened to Chrissy, our ancestors knew each other. And I remember the first time I heard the words before all else. I think it was spoken in Onondaga the first time I heard it. And it sounded so familiar, like a language like hearing a language I knew behind a closed door. And I realized that, and it took a long time. I'm like, why is this? I've never heard this before. Like, why does this sound familiar? And the answer that came to me from my ancestors was that we used to hear this all the time. Is that to be here in the northeastern part? We're in the Mohawk and adore the Mohawk, and our land is where we currently dwell is on the Mohican peoples that my ancestors in the 1600s and 1700s would have come through these lands, and they would have heard both the words before all else and other prayers and welcomings in the language of the people of the many different peoples who are here. And they would have heard it all the time. And so there was at least 150 years in which my ancestors would have heard the words. And it's one of the great tragedies is that we have not only lost that common practice as part of the ancestral tradition of this land, but we have also lost the memory that we had it, and the memory that it was held and heard by many different peoples from many different lands. And whatever vibration of light and love would have emanated from the speaking of those words, the memory of that is also lost. Mm-hmm. And so like now, Chrissy and I have been teaching a course on Haudenosaunee cosmovisions and mythologies of the peoples in a cross-cultural dialogue format. And when I hear, now I find that when I listen to the land, I see that web of relationships that the words themselves are speaking to, in which our grandmother moon and I see that long lineage of that feminine spirit that is part of her tradition, but also part of what my ancestors were invited into when they first came here. They had the opportunity to go into that divine feminine tradition, and they rejected it at that time. But their grandmothers, my grandfather's grandmothers, if you would, were absolutely people who heard the call of the wolf and who felt the sweep of the owl and who knew the movement of the dragon wings on their hills. And so as we begin these conversations, I acknowledge my grandfathers and I call upon my grandmothers for the songs that they sung to be returned to me in this time.
Beautiful. And I invite all of us who are here watching either live or later to just take a moment to invite our own grandmothers and grandfathers of wisdom into this conversation, into this circle. And I too honor the Mohicans who were here on the land where I live now, who were forcibly relocated to Wisconsin and perhaps other places. I acknowledge the portals, the land portals and vortices here that have either been, and mountains that have either been taken over or left dormant, and acknowledge that we are all part of a great movement to re-sanctify, restore, care for, once again, these places, and in cooperation with the original peoples, some of which who are returning back to this area physically. As we know, Sara and Chrissy, I re-met you at that Indigenous Peoples Day and Weekend event that was over, Columbus Day weekend. And it was like a balm to my soul for us to be able to participate together in various rituals, including going to the Housatonic River and making, cleansing offerings there and so forth. So we're talking here about the convergence of ancestral energy, magical earth energy, acknowledgement of the traumas and the dislocations. So I'd like to open the floor to both of your wisdom around the question of the dislocations, which is on many people's hearts as we look toward Thanksgiving. We'll spend some time looking at that, bringing whatever level of healing we can to it, and then let's move into what each of our traditions offers around understanding all of nature as animated, as peoples of different types, and looking at these magical aspects and magical interdimensional beings, what each of your traditions says about that and how we can reweave and co-create that. But let's first start with an acknowledgement of what has happened and why the Thanksgiving holiday can bring up so much for people and what kind of healing really needs to happen. Christy, let's invite you to speak to that if you wish.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those days that we observe here in the United States at this time of year. Canada observes it around the day that you acknowledge as Indigenous Peoples Day, or others still might acknowledge it as Columbus Day. And the idea of Thanksgiving and the pageants and some of the stereotyping and the lack of understanding of the history, the way it was experienced by the Indigenous people, can be really harmful. And also holding this dynamic tension of, it's also one of the days that we have been granted to spend with our family and friends and have festivals of food and fellowship, and that having to sit with both of those is part of the healing, and it's not a either or. I acknowledge the National Day of Mourning, and I also acknowledge the grace and beauty and of having family when so many others have lost theirs, connections to the people that were close to them due to boarding schools and assimilation and relocation, and part of the homecoming, which Sara and I is calling the events that was happening with the Mohican people. We were gathered for many other reasons on paper, and the words that were surrounding it was saying other things, but we were actually welcoming home a Mohican family. And they brought their ancestral songs with young people playing the drums. And the mountains were welcoming, the town, the rivers were welcoming. And I'm hoping the vibration of those voices and those drums help wake up the land to remember. And so those are the types of things that I hold when we talk about these holidays, when I see some very blatant stereotypes, traditions that people refuse to give up because they are traditions, and not recognize that they can harm others. And it's not just Indigenous people that those traditions can harm, and those tendencies to hold on to something that isn't necessarily reality. And so some Thanksgivings I can hold both with ease, and other times I struggle, and I sit with fire, and I sit with things of the non-human world, and help to myself to gain the wisdom to hold compassion. So when I do engage with the harmful things, I have the strength of the land behind me and my ancestors.
Wow, blessed be. We'll get more into that as we go along. Thank you so much. Sara, let's have you speak to this idea of the holiday we're about to embark on from your ancestral perspectives, as well as, you know, as an aware woman now, teacher, awakener, and bridge maker.
Yeah, this is one of those topics that I can talk about for about 20 hours.
Days.
So I'm going to try to be brief.
Yeah.
There's so much here. Every year I engage more deeply into the Thanksgiving celebration and holiday. And every year I learn something new. So trying to keep in, so I think it's worth thinking in terms of a little thinking about time for a moment, because a lot of the challenge of this holiday has to do with time. So the mid 1800s, the Thanksgiving as a holiday was on some level invented in the mid 1800s, around the time of the Civil War. It's a time when Abraham Lincoln gives a Thanksgiving proclamation and invites both the North and the South to sit together and to have a Thanksgiving meal together. And it's a very, I would say, politically brilliant move that he made. Thanksgiving as a practice has, and when I say Thanksgiving, I specifically mean the dinner of a particular set of foods, and families come together around the dinner, have been practiced for in the Northeast for probably around 100 years before Abraham Lincoln made that proclamation, but not like it wasn't like every place did it differently. It was scattered, if you would. And I think a bit earlier than that as well. And there was a woman named Sara Hill, who was sort of the Oprah Winfrey of her times. And she was a really remarkable woman who I have in many ways a lot of admiration for, who recognized the importance of this holiday for unifying, in many ways, a very troubled country, a country that was still forming its identity as a country. And so around that time, they also started to link this dinner, this celebratory moment, they started to link it back to a origin story. They started to link it back to what happened in 1621 with the Puritans and the Native people sitting, having a 3-day feast together. And we have evidence that that feast happened. That feast in 1621, which would have been roughly a year after the Mayflower landed in 1620, wow, was, and my ancestors came a couple years after that feast happened. So they would have known those people. So that 1620 feast, or that 1621 celebration, was a bit accidental. It was almost didn't happen. It just sort of happened to happen on some level. It was not intentional, and it was not called a Thanksgiving. It was a celebratory harvest festival or gathering, I would say. And there was, 3 days of feasting, and each group, the Wampanoag people, about 90 Wampanoag warriors, and the much smaller group of pilgrims, all men, feasted together and played games and shot rifles, because that's what men do in those situations at that time. And we're all, merrymaking for a very brief period of time. So the folks in the 1800s looked back at that 3-day gathering, and they said this was the first Thanksgiving, which is an 1800 person projecting something onto the past for the purpose of the 1800s. And the purpose of the 1800s from that white American perspective, and American at that time, in the 1600s, the word American would have only meant the Native people in America. And by the 1860s, the word American in the eyes of the white folks only meant the white Americans in America. It probably would not have meant the enslaved people who were enslaved.
Well, sure.
So they wouldn't have been considered Americans, right? So like the actual term of American had changed significantly in 150, 200 years. So what I'm trying to get at is that a whole set of images about that first Thanksgiving were painted in the 1800s, and those images shaped the national assumption of what Thanksgiving was. Because images shape reality very strongly, right? They shape and they form. The image that we have of something forms what it becomes. And so the images that were shaped were 1850s fantasy, 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, the late 17th century or 19th century. I always get that confused. But time's very confusing. But it shapes this idea of that first dinner, which is in no way, shape, or form what happened. They were projecting onto their past their idea of what they wanted Indigenous and settler relationships to be, and what was happening simultaneously to the Civil War was not only was the Civil War erupting, but the entire westward expansion was happening. And westward expansion is a very nice term for what is essentially the genocide of Indigenous peoples, and the theft of their land, and a series of broken promises and broken treaties. So a lot of the images that we have of Thanksgiving shows these Native people in plainclothes dress, which, as you may know, is only something that Plains people wear. So it certainly would not have been what the East Coast Native folks of the Wampanoag or the Haudenosaunee or the Lenape would not have worn those outfits. But you also see these images of like the priest or the pastor praying to the sky, and the Native people sitting on the ground.
Yeah.
In this very subservient position.
Yeah.
So that is displaying this relationship that A, was never the way it was, and B, was what they wanted it to be at that time. They wanted the Native folks to be subservient to the white folks. And so then they violently enacted a series of policies and practices, and the entirety of our property system and our institutional structure would have destroyed, was geared to take over Indigenous America.
Wow.
And that was not necessary by any way, shape, or form. And taking over Indigenous America, it is destroying the animist worldview that had enabled this place to thrive.
Yes. Thank you. And let's go into that. Because thank you for that clarification. Well, it's a simple history that we could relearn. I mean, it's amazing how the veil has been pulled over our eyes. We don't even know what the heck this holiday really is and how it got distorted or co-created or whatever. So let's talk about, and I so respect, the knowledge that both of you have, and there's a wealth of material that you have. We are posting some of the links here. I believe that we posted a couple of them. We're also welcoming comments and questions from people who are watching. But let's then now move into that animistic, what we're talking about, animistic, and what I would say the Fae and the She, in my language, the interdimensional levels of nature. Let's talk about that. What is that knowledge that was suppressed and that we are needing to bring forth, and that many people are doing, not just who were first peoples on land, but many people are in this process of co-creation. Chrissy, let's have you talk about how you understand the world to be, what I call the magical world. What is in your tradition that we all need to resurrect here?
Well, I was so appreciative of this part of the conversation, and it gave me a chance to dig into some of the stories. Some of them I know very well, and others I know lightly. And sometimes it's like, really good question there. How this relates, and I jumped into one of the documents that I frequently use in these conversations, and it's on the Project Gutenberg. It's called "Stories the Iroquois Tell Their Children."
Yes.
And
And can you
it is,
explain the relationship,
okay.
Iroquois, Haudenosaunee? Not
Yeah,
everybody knows what.
yeah, sure, I can do that. The Iroquois is a French word. That is the word that others call us. Haudenosaunee is the word that we call ourselves and name ourselves. Prefer that in general. It is said that the Iroquois could mean something as derogatory as snake eater, or which is implied as cannibals as well. Not to say that some of those stories might not be true, but you don't want to be called that.
That's right.
We want to be self-determining and self-identifying. So Haudenosaunee is
The people of the Longhouse.
the people of the Longhouse.
That's how that's
And this comprises 6 nations that came together
Right.
through the peacemaker.
Well, the Sixth Nation, which is the Tuscarora, we only got here about 300 years ago. We were up in the areas known as New York and Pennsylvania, and we wandered away. We went to a great river. We could not cross it, and we ended up in the coastal area of New Bern, near Wilmington, North Carolina. And 300 years ago, things got a little uncomfortable and violent. And so we walked back up all the way from North Carolina into the central New York. And the Senecas were kind enough to give us a space near Niagara Falls. And the Mohawks recognized our language and entered us, welcomed us home. Again, talking about welcoming and relocation. We were welcomed home into the Confederacy with the notion of this peacemaking, because we had been away. Well, that was the other 5 nations were working with that. So
Yeah.
that was a lot of history right there. So.
Yeah. But these nations came together under the influence of a miraculously born man,
Right.
known as the peacemaker, and Hiawatha, or I'm not sure how you pronounce his name or name him, and Jigonsase, right, the female leader at the time. And this was an effort of peace to nations that were already having troubles and warrings of their own before even colonizers came in. So you were well established as a 5 and 6 nation confederacy by the time contact happened with the Europeans. And then, so not to interrupt you, but you were on a stream talking about your own, the magical knowing of your people, and why this is food for us today.
Yeah, and so this PDF, it was a hardcover book at one point, but through the magic of the internet, you can get it digitally. Copyrighted 1917. This person, Mabel Powers, her dedication is to all the children who ask how and why, especially those red children who see with wonder eyes, and those pale-faced children who yet believe in fairies. These stories are lovingly dedicated.
Blessed be.
And so I thought it's like, wow. So as I'm reading, we opened talking about the words before all else and the Thanksgiving address. And some of the opening paragraphs in this book is entitled The Little People.
Wow. And what is the book, just to clarify, so that everybody can go find it on the internet?
Yeah, it's Mabel Powers, and stories that we tell are Iroquois. Let me see. Let me roll back here. Stories the Iroquois tell their children.
Okay.
And so, as part of the introductory text before you even get to the stories, there is a section for the little people. And I know the little people as kind of a cautionary tale that don't go outside when it's dark. The little people are out. Or many of our elders when they're ready to walk on from this earth and join the different cosmic plane that they exist in. They might talk to the little people. They might be talking to people.
Wow.
And so in this book,
There it is right there. I honestly didn't even know that this link existed. And here we are through the magic of the little people or the fairies.
Yeah.
We're partaking of this conversation.
Yeah. So all the children who live close to Mother Earth come to know and see the fairies of the flowers, the woods, the rocks, and the waters. And they go into deeper description. But there is a group of these little people, and our children remember that these little people in their feast of Thanksgiving help the sweet waters of the maples flow. Do they not whisper the growing seeds and show the way to light? Do they not guide the runners of the strawberries, turn the blossoms into the sun, and paint the berries red? And they also tint the grains and give to the corn its good taste. So, the words before all else and our Thanksgiving in this stories that we should be telling our children, we are engaging the little people and the work that they do in this human world that we can appreciate through fellowship. But there is more to be thankful for. So
wow. So, that as a matter of course, in teaching the young people of these nations, yes, it was, let's talk about these little people, these fairies. This is what they do. This is their technology. This is how they, we are relying on them. Maybe we should have some respect for them and even a little caution around when their domain is more populated at nighttime, which we all instinctively know. Without lights, no one wants to be out in the woods, And so that is truly, truly extraordinary. And again, these rich repositories of knowledge are here for us to learn from and to cross, pollinate with among all of our peoples. Sara, let's have you talk about what you know about the Fae, the She, from your ancestral background, probably going back, hundreds, if not thousands of years, right, to old Europe. Let's have you bring in some of that. And how do you see this all linking together through your love with Chrissy?
Mm-hmm.
That's another topic right there. There you two are, reincarnates, ancestral beings who are somehow here together. You love each other. You're partnered. Wow. Your ancestors knew each other back then. For goodness sake, you can literally trace that magical weirdness. But Sara,
There's a lot of magical weirdnesses going on.
Okay, well we want to hear about magical.
This show is all about magical weirdness. So don't go back, right? Intellectual, whatever. Everybody.
And we do have some comments, but we want to hear more comments, questions. How is this? And Linda, we'll get to your comment too. But Sara, yes.
Oh, there's a lot there. I think I first want to just acknowledge the role that cauldrons and dragons play in our lives. And the important, So very recently, a deer skeleton came into our life. A deer died in the woods last winter, and we've been caring for this skeleton and admiring its decomposition and the way that the dead have, the way that the flesh has fallen off the bones and gone to be transmuted into the earth. And that kind of the miracle and the mystery of death as part of our life. And we now have the parts of the deer skeleton on our outdoor altar. And I think about how much the dead support the living, and of how much our more than human kin, ancestors and spirits, dragons and little people, are supportive and are part of this wild web that we get to dwell within. And of course, there is like many stories that I grew up with, mostly from Scandinavia for various reasons. I have a lot of Norwegian heritage as well as English. So there's a lot of Scandinavian stories that were really important to me growing up. But one of the things that I have found in my own experience is that to live on this land is I need to work with both the stories of Europe and the stories of this land.
Yes.
I can't only work with the stories of Europe.
Yes.
And Christy and I were wondering whether or not the fairies came with the ships. Did they come along with the grains and the cows and the sheep, which honestly caused a huge amount of damage here? Or did they come before the ships came to warn what the mystical creatures here, to warn them to go into hiding?
Wow.
Because a horrific time was coming.
Oh my
Did
gosh.
they know the damage that was about to come with the European ships? And did they warn their kin on this side of the pond, of the Atlantic, to withdraw as a form of protection? Or did they encourage them to use whatever magical powers they had to fight? I don't know. I think it's an interesting question.
Wow.
But to really recognize the extent that the new earth, this new creation, I talk a lot about so part of what's happening with climate change is that because the climate is changing, the old ways, no matter what old ways you have, they were all formed from a different climatic moment. So the ecology and the spiritual world was functioning together in the different way. Like as the ecology is changing, so the spiritual world is also impacting it.
Wow.
So there is a way in which climate change is forcing a different spiritual ecological relationship to emerge.
Wow.
That has not yet happened. In order to prepare ourselves and to be a part of that new ecological spiritual materialization, if you would, manifestation, I guess, but it's almost inevitable that happens. And all the old calendars and all the old practices have to kind of be reassessed and rewritten.
Wow.
You have to understand the colonial moment.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand the break. And some people will say, trace this to a larger patriarchal moment. I like to focus on colonization rather than patriarchy, and I have my reasons for that. But the colonial moment, and in particular to recognize that, and this is something where a little bit of intellectual history is sometimes useful, that the Max Weber, one of the great sociologists, and in no way, shape, or form himself an animist that I'm aware of, like very clearly stated that the coming of industrialization and the process of the modernization of the world, which itself is a result of colonization, was very much the disenchantment of the world. That's his phrase.
Yeah.
And he recognizes that the animism, the life force of the time when trees had, and he talks about it very explicitly, when trees could talk and mountains had meaning, was disappearing with the modern society.
Oh yeah, no kidding, right?
Right? And so like colonization brings with it, you can't understand the modern society and industrialization without colonization. Colonization brings with it the destruction of an animist world.
Yeah.
And so the process of undoing and decolonizing ourselves
Yeah.
is, I feel, completely necessary for the spiritual emergence that is
Yeah, the reenchantment.
for the reenchantment of the world. Like you can't do the full reenchantment without clearing your body, your soma self, your spiritual self, and without engaging with these larger political economies that are so entrenched in this colonial pattern.
Yeah,
And
not to mention dealing with just the huge energies that have been here of trauma, grief, blood sacrifice entities that go on, all
Yep.
like every one of us who starts on the spiritual work gets into a block eventually. And those of us who are really getting aware are like, whoa, it's in the land near where I live. Holy cow. I've got to reckon with this. I've got to do something here. I've got to participate. Just so it's political levels, cultural levels, and deep spiritual levels. And I even heard, I don't know how you feel about this, either of you, but I've even heard that human relationships, male, female, have been compromised and contested and made poisoned because of the genocide. So there's some aspect of the genocide energies that feed right into male female relationships in this country, at least, and prevent it from being harmonious.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a real serious reality that if so, we've got to look at and deal with here. So there's so many layers. I mean, does that ring true at all to you? Have you heard of that type of
Yeah, actually, we've made a connection that the violence against Mother Earth by the men that want to dominate, it follows through the destruction into female people, female energy, female spirit as well.
the womb?
And thinking about boarding schools,
Oh,
industrial schools, which my grandmothers have been a part of, that the ease that colonization has destroyed Mother Earth made it easy for them to destroy the children of that earth.
yeah.
And so that connection of violence, whether it be gendered or whether it be between peoples, I think it's deeply connected.
Yeah, and it's a tricky, right? Because it's tricky and how we think and talk about it. So just to use the example that Chrissy's giving, and I've had some really good. I know some people are working on this in a really beautiful way, but the boarding schools, for those of you who I'm hoping you're aware of it, that's essentially took Native children from their parents, usually by force, by some type of force, and the phrase was you
Kill
the Indian and
to
save the man. That was the phrase that kind of dominated the Indian boarding schools, and this went on for a good 200 years, 300 years, depending on how you want to just think about it. And it wretched, it just tore apart Native cultures all around both Canada, what is now Canada, and the United States. And they weren't allowed to speak their language. They weren't allowed to practice their rituals. Naturally, this also would have really severed any explicit connection that kids would have had with the animist more than human world. Whatever that connection that they inherently had as children and that have been passed on to them through their families would have been really, really torched. Yeah. And the violent, and so much violence, so many young kids died through these schools.
Horrible. And the graves that they've found, I mean, and goodness knows what.
It's really, really awful. And to recognize that these are all led by, most of them were led by Christian denominations, including Quakers, which are usually seen as good Christians.
Right.
And that many of the people who were teaching and thus enforcing were women. And they were often young white women
Wow.
who saw themselves as doing a good thing. They
God's
saw
work.
themselves as good people. They saw themselves as like this. They
Good
were
works.
helping. They were
I
helping.
know.
They saw themselves as helping.
It's
And
all the programming, right?
it's programming, and it's it's the programming, and but just to really recognize like how much I think it's really important, especially for settler women, for women with European descent in America, to recognize how much we have been very much part of this colonial pattern,
Right.
and that our healing has to entail
Yeah.
truthfulness of what our mothers and grandmothers did, and
Right.
how they helped the patriarchy and helped the colonizer,
Right.
and to really seek out our own healing in that process,
Yeah.
and to recognize that that we use our power of creation and we use our power of the womb for harm, to do harm.
That's right. Because we are screwed. Like, even as much healing personally as we do, there's still a splintered spear in our wombs or wherever from this energy that is remaining. We've got to address that, the origins of that as part of the spiritual work.
And we can't I think there's a lot of desire to especially amongst women, there's a tendency to not address that,
Mm-hmm.
and to kind of keep to not really go into like healing that colonial wound within ourselves and within our own ancestry.
Yeah. And I've had the experience, I lived in the Boston, Cambridge, Massachusetts area for years, to some degree, unhappily, like not really knowing what was going on. And I was all around Harvard University and this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, something's off, and I never fit in. And the whole little patrician energy that they've got going on, the blue blood thing that's still through that, I was just not happy. And so I thought, with dread, here I was coming back now to Western Massachusetts 3 years ago. I somehow ended up here. I was following the dictation. Sorry about that. I got so excited that I got myself out of the studio. And so now I'm here 3 years, and I've settled my own little roots here for a while. I'm so aware of this all the time. And I'm like, what the heck can I do about this? I'm in the Berkshire Mountains, and there's all of this stuff. And so I'm doing what I can, and we will all be working together on this to do some healing ceremonies and so forth. I've been in touch with another man named Unchatwa, who is, he's got Mohican heritage as well as colonizer heritage in one. And he has received a vision from Corn Mother about healing. It's this whole extravagant thing. So once we all get settled from the past couple of years where nobody could be together, he's going to be getting back together with that. So yeah, I know. I mean, this is a really active thing, and we only have a few minutes left to our hour. I wanted to just acknowledge some of the comments that are coming in, and know that we could talk for so much longer, and trust that whatever we have touched into is touching people, and that they can find out more from both of you and from me. But Linda is saying, I cannot bear the millions of animals that have to die for us on, Thanksgiving Day. And best we fast and take food out to the forest and feed wildlife and thank them for sharing their habitats with us. That's one healing response. We have Courtney saying, I love the combination of history, magic, and current events in this conversation. It's all one. Yes. Athena is saying, I've noticed huge clearings on the lands as well as within myself once I accepted the past of my ancestors, So, and all that, when everybody has a different thing, because some of our ancestors came into the US at different times, mine was like Italians who came in around the early 1900s and so forth. So let's just tune in as to what wants to be shared in these last 5 minutes that we have together regarding what we can do going forward. Maybe one step of recommendation that you each have for us to go forward to re-enchant our worlds, to dig into this indigenous knowledge that is within all traditions. As we know, the ancient Europeans had this in spades, right? What one step can we do to re-enchant our worlds by connecting back with this animistic fairy little people energy? Chrissy, would you like to dive into that a little bit?
Well, I'm just thinking about 1,000 things that we could engage with, and it is wonderful to have like this energetic connection with you not being that far from here. It feels like an abundance of energy that we have connected. From barely a month that we were reconnected in Massachusetts, and now we're here. And I think just imagining things as an abundance rather than a binary, and things that are both ands rather than either ors. So it's a little
which
up there in the cosmos, but
which the two of you embody through some kind of, karmic, if I may, coming together, right? As partners.
Mm-hmm.
And what so attracted me to you and to have you come on the show was seeing you both speak at the various formats of this Indigenous weekend that we had over, Columbus Day weekend, and hearing the wisdom, listening to some of your other podcasts and things like that, interviews, and really feeling the sense of the bridging. Mm-hmm. That being so necessary. And that day at that Indigenous event, when, they asked, how do you forgive? How do you get over the rage and the anger? Because I've been in groups where there was so much rage in groups of women. There was so much rage coming at me and others that it's like, how can I possibly bridge with you on that? Like, you're attacking me now. Like, what? How are we going to get ahead? So, that bridging, and just, thank you for being that. You're like two sides of a coin. You're like twins. You're like twins. You're like twin people who've come in like, hey, let's be partners. And we're anyway. So Sara, maybe your final words here on a step that people can take. So we've heard, thinking of both and what would you recommend to people watching?
We wrote, you're talking about bridging. So Kristine and I kind of collaborated to create this little booklet on land acknowledgements.
Yes, I have that.
And we ended up talking in it about bridging. And I think we're going to actually offer a course on land acknowledgements in the winter. I never thought I would say that, but
I didn't either.
Yeah, because it's actually so much more rich, and there's so much more there than I actually thought we would. But like I want to invite people to think about spells, and to think about colonization, and to think of the colonization, the papal bulls, the Doctrine of Discovery, is a kind of very, very powerful spell that was wrought by the Pope and a very few number of elite men in
Huge.
Portugal.
Negative magic right there.
Yeah, it's a very powerful spell that was cast. And there was a counter spell that was cast from the women who gathered in the woods with their fires.
Yes.
And they also cast a spell.
Yeah.
And because of the way of the world at that time, that doctrine discovery spell, like whoosh, like that became the thing. But the spell that became the thing that shaped the world that we lived in and caused so much dismembering and so much disenchantment.
Right.
But
Meaning that colonizers could come in and take lands, blah, blah, blah. Okay.
All of it.
Yeah.
All that bad shit. But the spell that was wrought and that was cast by those who dwelled in the forest and those who dwelled in the mountains and those who listened to the sea, that is only just now beginning to come into being.
That's right.
That circle is only just now beginning to reconnect. Uh-huh. And that sacred hoop that was broken is beginning to figure out how to come together again.
Yeah.
And that we are in a time when that circle can begin. And I really want to emphasize the beginning of this.
Yeah.
To awkwardly and haphazardly and with lots and lots of mistakes find itself. The circle itself has a power that is not those of us who are sitting in it, but it can bring us to it. And so to see land acknowledgements and bridging and all the different forms of returning, and whether it be returning land and returning land practices and returning to waters and the re-ritualization, all of these pieces are part of enacting and solidifying and bringing up and bringing down the spell that our great-great-great-grandmothers on multiple sides of the ocean were whispering to one another, and that the mosses and the trees have been holding for this moment.
Wow. Let's just pause right there. I mean, that is beautiful. Okay.
You got your marching orders, everybody. Spells, all right? Get busy.
And, I mean, like videos like this are part of my loving, with intention spell casting. We're not talking about, being out of alignment with your goddess self or God self. We're talking about getting in alignment with source creator to the best of your ability. And the little people, the big people, whoever they are, and working to co-create these types of magical rituals as a base foundation, starting place for the rest of it, so that the rest of the physical actions can be a lot more efficient. They can go more easily, more harmoniously, and so forth. So we're working, political actions, or however you define that, with the magical actions, and then we can start moving forward. So I just love that. And I really want to thank both of you for being here. Kristine Hill, Sara Jolena Wolcott, for coming, for bringing your wisdom, for bringing your energy. We have more links under this video as to how people can find out more about you, contact you, find out about that upcoming course that hopefully will be manifesting now that you've announced it. We'll be doing more in this area of Massachusetts, Eastern New York. I want to again invite everybody to like and share this video, particularly in this pre-Thanksgiving time, which I think will offer such loving illumination for many people. And please subscribe to my channel. Please take a look at sevensistersmysteryschool.com to find out more of the holiday offerings that we have for you, the course that's putting the sacred back in your holidays, our cacao ceremony. All of these things are the form of spell casting to help us get into the healthier and the more awake state, so that we can do all these levels of healings that we need. Any very final brief words from either of you?
Gratitude and appreciation for everyone who's listening and who's engaging and who's taking these words and softening their hearts and opening their spirits. And I see you in the chat, and I see you in my spirit mind's eye, and I wish you blessings on all the many forms of your casting and your wonderings and your wanderings.
And add to that compassion for self, for others, for the humans and the non-humans and the more than humans.
Blessed be. All right. And with that, everybody, we will say goodbye and many blessings on your spell casting. Ciao.